Wyoming Territory, January 1889, the snow had come hard and fast through the night, and by morning the world was white and dead silent. Rowena Price stood on the side of the road, her boots soaked through and her fingers stiff from the cold. Her dress, thin cotton meant for spring, clung to her legs. Beside her was a wooden crate full of chickens that had frozen stiff sometime before dawn, all dead, every one of them. A wagon wheel had splintered miles back, and the man she had paid to take her north never came back from looking for help. She had waited. Hours turned into a day. Then she walked. Now she stood alone. Cold, hungry, a crate of useless birds at her feet and frost biting at her skin. Her lips trembled, but she refused to cry. A horse's hooves broke the stillness. She turned, heart thudding, and saw a lone rider coming through the haze of snow. He wore a sheepskin coat dusted white and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. The man slowed his horse as he neared her. "You alive?" he asked, voice rough from the cold. Rowena nodded once. "Barely." He looked at the crate. "Those yours?" "They were," she said. "Not anymore." He dismounted and walked over, boots crunching on the packed snow. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a square jaw and a weather-worn face. Maybe 30, maybe a little more. His eyes were a deep brown, steady and kind. "I'm Hollis Ellard," he said, holding out a gloved hand. "Rowena Price." He looked at her hands, red and raw. "You riding with someone?" "No." "Not anymore." He glanced toward the empty road behind her. "Come on," he said. "You're gonna freeze out here. I do not want charity." "I am not offering charity," Holly said. "I am offering warmth and stew. You can take it or stay out here with your chickens." She hesitated. Then she stepped forward. His horse was a strong gray gelding, and he helped her up first, settling behind her in the saddle. His coat opened just enough to wrap around her shoulders, and she sank back against him, too cold to speak. They rode in silence, snow falling soft and steady. After 20 minutes, the outline of a small homestead came into view, a log cabin with smoke curling from the chimney, a barn off to the side, and a split rail fence buried in snowdrifts. Inside, the warmth hit her like a punch. Hollis helped her out of her wet boots, then handed her a thick blanket and crouched beside the fireplace, stirring the coals to life. "Sit close," he said. "You are shaking." She did. He moved into the kitchen, poured something from a kettle into a tin cup and brought it to her. "Coffee. Hot." "Careful." She wrapped her hands around it and took a sip. It burned. It was perfect. He pulled a pot from the stove and ladled out 2 bowls of stew, then brought one to her. "I only had enough left for one," he said. "You can have it." "No, we can share." "I will be fine, Miss Price." "You are half frozen." She looked at him, really looked. He was lean, rough around the edges, but there was nothing unkind in him. No leering, no pity, just quiet steadiness. "Thank you," she said, voice soft. He nodded and leaned back against the hearth, eating from the pot with a spoon. She ate every drop. Then silence settled again, deep and warm. "How long were you out there?" he asked after a while. "Since yesterday morning." "Jesus. I was going to Riverton. My uncle has a farm there." "You sure he is still there?" "No," she admitted. "But I did not have anywhere else to go." Hollis looked at the window, snow still falling. "You can stay a few nights, until the storm passes." "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not." Later, she fell asleep on a cot by the fire, wrapped in quilts that smelled of cedar and smoke. She did not dream. By morning, the storm had passed, but the snow was waist-deep. Holly spent the day digging out the barn and checking on the cow. Rowena helped where she could, her hands red from the cold, but her steps steadier than the day before. At supper, he cooked beans and cornbread and sat across from her at the little wood table. "You are not from around here," he said. "Georgia," she said. "My father was a preacher. He died last summer, my mother 2 years before that. You came all the way here alone." I had nothing left there. "Just debts and bad memories." Hollis looked at her for a long time. "You are braver than most." "I am not brave," she said. "I am just surviving. That counts." She smiled for the first time since he found her. It surprised both of them. They fell into a rhythm. Days passed in quiet work feeding the animals, chopping wood, melting snow for water. Hollis gave her his coat when she needed it. She patched a tear in his shirt. They spoke little, but the silence was not empty. It was easy, comfortable. One morning she found him out by the barn, hammering new boards into a broken stall. "You built all this yourself?" she asked. "Every beam, and you live here alone. I had a brother. He died in the war, parents after that, just me now." Rowena stepped closer. "Do you ever get lonely?" He paused, looked at her. "Not until lately." She looked down, her breath clouding in the air. "Neither did I." That night after supper she sat beside him by the fire. Their shoulders touched. A quiet warmth spread through her chest. "I thought I was going to die out there," she said. "You did not," he said. "You made it. Because of you." He turned to her, eyes steady. "Because you kept walking." They were close, too close. Her heart beat hard. "I do not know what happens next," she whispered. "Neither do I." She reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation, his fingers rough and warm around hers. She leaned in, and he met her halfway. The kiss was soft, careful, but it changed everything. The thaw began 2 days later, slow and stubborn. Water dripped from the eaves by mid-morning, but the snow still lay heavy in the yard, gray at the edges where soot from the chimney had settled. Rowena stood at the kitchen table, sleeves rolled, peeling potatoes with practiced strokes. Hollis had gone to check the stream that ran along the back edge of his land. He said the ice might be breaking, and he'd need to know when the runoff would flood the bottom meadow. She offered to go with him, but he shook his head and handed her the sack of potatoes instead. "They sprouted some," he said. "Cut off the eyes, rest still good." She had nodded, grateful for something to do. The warmth of the fire reached her spine as she worked. Her feet no longer ached from cold, and her hands had stopped shaking days ago. She hadn't worn her old dress since that first night. Hollis had found a bundle of women's clothes in a trunk in the attic left behind by someone else's history, and they fit well enough. The wool skirt was too long, but she hemmed it. She didn't ask who it had belonged to, and he didn't say. The door opened with a rush of wind and snow melt. Hollis stepped inside, boots muddy, hat in his hand. "Creek's moving," he said, knocking snow from his coat. "Won't be long before it cuts through the ridge trail. If you still mean to go to Riverton, best do it soon." She wiped her hands and turned. "You think the road will be passable? Maybe in 3 days. Wagon'll make it if the ground holds." She looked down at the potato skins, scattered like pale curls on the table. "I don't know if I mean to go." Hollis didn't answer right away. He hung up his coat and moved to the stove, checking the firebox. "You said your uncle had a farm," he said. I said I hoped he did. He nodded once, then sat down across from her. The silence between them wasn't tense, it was waiting for something. Rowena laid the knife aside. "What would I do here?" Hollis didn't look up. "Anything you want." "That's not an answer." He met her eyes. "I don't have a plan for you, Rowena. I've got a barn that leaks and a cow that's too old, and I burn through boots faster than I can fix them. But I wouldn't mind someone sitting across from me come morning, or someone to tell me when the cornbread's burned." Her throat tightened. She looked at his hands, calloused and still streaked with dirt from the creek. "I used to sew for the women in town," she said. "Back in Dalton. Took in laundry too. I could do that again." He nodded. "There's folks scattered around here. Ranch hands, trappers. A widow 2 miles south who keeps bees. You'd find work." She hesitated. "Would they take to me?" "Not all of them," he said, "but some will. That's how it goes." She sat down slowly. The legs of the chair scraped the floor, and she winced at the sound. "I don't want to be beholden." "You wouldn't be. You gave me Stu," she said, voice quiet. "You gave me your coat, your fire, a place to sleep." He leaned forward, both elbows on the table. "I gave you those things because I wanted to. Not because I expect anything back." Rowena studied him in the light of the hearth. His face was quiet, but not unreadable. She saw the wear of years, the solitude that had settled into the lines around his eyes, but not bitterness. Just the shape a life takes when lived alone too long. I never had a say before, she said. Not when my father ran the house, not when the bank came for it. Even after he died, it felt like I was just walking through someone else's story. You've got a say now. She reached across the table, and he let her take his hand. A bird called once from the snow-laden pine outside, the first she'd heard since arriving. Later, she followed him to the barn. He showed her how to latch the stall door against the wind, how to tell when the hay was molding, how to milk the cow without making her kick. His voice was low, patient. She listened carefully, and when she got it right, he smiled not wide, but true. By nightfall, she knew she wouldn't leave in 3 days. Not for Riverton. Not for any place where she'd be a stranger again. After supper, they sat close on the bench by the hearth. He mended a trace strap with a curved needle. She read aloud from a book she'd found wedged behind the flour tin, an old volume of poems, the pages yellowed and torn at the corners. Her voice faltered once on a line about love lasting past winter. He looked up, met her eyes, and didn't look away. She set the book down. "You want me to stay, Hollies?" He didn't speak. Just reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and let his hand rest at her cheek. "I do," he said. She leaned in, slow and sure. Their kiss didn't feel like the first. It felt like something remembered. And when they parted, the quiet that settled wasn't empty. It was home. The days lengthened in small, steady ways. Icicles shrank from the eaves, and the snow around the water trough turned to slush. By the second week of February, a thin crust of brown began to show in hollows where the wind had swept the drifts clean. The cold still held on, but it no longer bit the same way. Rowena stood at the edge of the pasture with a tin pail in one hand and a clutch of eggs in the other, lifting her face to the thin sunlight. The hens had begun laying again, just 3 eggs this morning, but it was something. She tucked them into the folds of her shawl and turned toward the house. Inside, Hollies was sanding a new door frame for the pantry. He looked up as she stepped in, his eyes moving over the eggs and then to her face. "They come through?" he asked. 3. One was cracked. "That's 3 more than we had last week." She set them in a woven basket near the stove and brushed the hem of her skirt where mud had splashed up from the path. "Did you use the old pine for that?" she asked, nodding toward the frame. "Fir, found a few planks in the loft. They'll hold better. You're not planning to do the rest of the kitchen too, are you? Not unless it falls in." He wiped his hands on a cloth and leaned against the wall, watching her as she stirred ash from the stove's base. "I was thinking of building a second coop come spring." Rowena straightened and wiped her palms against her skirt. "You think this place can hold that many birds? If we're careful with feed, I'd have to trade for some grain." She tilted her head. "You already have a plan for what I'll be doing come spring. I've been watching you carry that pail every morning through snow and wind. Figured if you're willing to do it in winter, you're likely to manage a few more hens when the ground softens." She didn't answer, but her eyes softened. He stepped closer. "You still thinking of Riverton?" "I haven't written the letter," she said, not quite looking at him. "If I did, I'd have to explain why I waited so long, or why I might not come after all. You don't owe anyone an explanation." "I know, I just—" She looked down at her hands. "I've been somewhere I didn't belong before. I know what it feels like. And here," she met his gaze, "feels like I haven't done anything wrong just by breathing." Neither spoke for a time. The only sound came from a log shifting in the stove. "I finished the shelves in the back room," he said. "If you wanted to keep sewing again, thought it might help having a place to lay things out." She blinked. "You built those for me. You'd need somewhere to keep fabric." "That trunk's not right for folding." The thought of shelves made to fit her hands, and her work settled around her in a way that felt like breath after holding it too long. She crossed to him and pressed her forehead to his chest. He didn't move at first, then wrapped his arms around her, holding firm but not possessive. "I don't know a thing about building a coop," she said quietly. "You'll learn. I've never mended a fence. Well, I've never made a shirt that didn't hang crooked. So we'll be even." She stayed there a while, listening to the rhythm of his breath and the quiet pop of the fire behind them. That night, Rowena lit a lamp in the back room and unpacked a bundle of calico she'd brought tucked at the bottom of her crate. She laid it out over the shelves, smoothing the cloth with both hands, and ran her fingers along the clean edge of the wood Hollies had planed. She heard his footsteps pause in the doorway. "You're sure?" he asked. She didn't turn. "I don't need to be sure. I just need to want it enough to stay." He stepped inside, set something gently on the shelf beside her, a folded shirt of his, the collar worn but clean. "I figured you'd need something to start with." She glanced down. "You want me to fix this? Only if you've got time." "I suppose I will." She looked up. "If I stay—" "You will," he said. She turned fully then. "Because you want me to." "No," Holly said, stepping closer. "Because you want to." When he kissed her, it was quiet and steady, no rush in it, no question. Just two people meeting in a room built to hold them, with shelves wide enough for what comes next. By the first week of March, the ground thawed enough to sink a boot. Mud sucked at the soles and left behind the sharp, sour scent of wet soil. The trees hadn't budded yet, but the air carried a different weight, a promise of green things not far off. Rowena stood near the fence line, cotton apron tied snug at her waist, stringing wire between two cedar posts Hollies had set the day before. The work was stiff and slow, but her hands had grown steadier with labor, her grip more certain. "You're pulling it too tight," Holly said behind her, crouched to drive a staple into the wood. "It'll snap when the ground shifts." She let out a breath. "I keep thinking tighter is stronger. Sometimes, not with wire, it needs room to move." She eased her grip and tried again. He stood and brushed his palms against his trousers. "You mind a ride into town tomorrow? I need to trade for nails and salt. Figured we could stop by the mail drop, see if your uncle's written back. If he has, I'll read it, but I'm not going anywhere. Didn't think you were. Just figured you'd want to know." They walked back to the house together, boots caked with mud. The sky was pale and wide above them, clouds stretched thin across it like worn linen. Inside, Rowena unpinned her shawl and hung it by the door. Hollies poured water from the kettle into a basin and set it on the table. She washed the dirt from her hands and dried them on a rag worn soft at the edges. "Do you miss town?" she asked, wringing the cloth out slowly. "I go when I have to." "That's not what I asked." He leaned against the doorframe. "Used to. When my brother was alive, we'd ride in for dances, cards, whatever passed for fun. Now it's mostly prices and weather." "You ever dance?" "Not well." "You," my mother taught me. Said no one should wait on a man to lead if she could help it. Hollies' mouth curved faintly. "She sounds like she'd have gotten along with you." "I didn't get along with her until after she was gone." Rowena folded the cloth and set it aside. "I think she'd like it here, though. The quiet. The way things are done with purpose." He walked over, his boots thudding softly on the plank floor. "If you had the choice, what would you build next?" "I'd plant a garden," she said. "Not for show. Food. Roots, squash, maybe some cabbage if the soil'll take it." "Think it'll grow?" "Won't know unless I try." She looked up at him then, standing so close she could see the way the light caught the faint scar along his jaw, one she hadn't noticed before. "Where'd that come from?" "Loose nail in a gate hinge," he said. "Got careless. You always fix things yourself." "There's no one else to do it." Rowena reached up, her fingers brushing the edge of the scar. "You don't have to be the only one anymore." His eyes held hers, something quiet settling behind them, not surprise, something more like recognition. "I know," he said. That night they sat outside on the porch steps. The wind had softened and the moon rose full above the ridge. Hollies handed her a tin cup of tea steeped from bark and dried mint leaves. It was bitter, but she drank it down. "After the war," he said, "I rode south for a while. Thought I'd try my hand at cattle. Didn't last. Too many men with fast tempers and short memory." She waited. "I came back here because it felt honest. Land doesn't lie to you. It either grows or it doesn't." Rowena stared out toward the dark field. I want something I can build with my hands. Something that's mine because I worked for it, not because someone gave it to me or left it behind. You've already started. I think I have. They sat in silence, the kind that didn't press or pull. When she leaned against his shoulder, he shifted just enough to fit her there. I've been thinking, he said after a while, about the second room off the kitchen. If we pulled up the floorboards laid in stone, it might keep better through the summer. You want a root cellar. I want you to have a place to store what you grow. She didn't answer right away. Just rested her hand on his thigh, fingers curling into the fabric of his trousers. You keep making room for me, she said. I'm not making it, Holly said. You already filled it. He turned his head, kissed the top of hers, and let it rest there. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of thawed earth and distant pine. And for the first time in a long while, Rowena didn't brace against it. The road into town had turned to rutted sludge by the time they reached the general store. Hollis guided the wagon around the worst of it, his hands steady on the reins. Rowena sat beside him beneath a wool shawl, her boots resting on a folded grain sack to keep the damp from seeping through. The air smelled of wet cedar and horses, and the sky hung low, stained the color of pewter. They hitched the team outside the store and stepped in together. The bell over the door gave a sharp ring as it swung shut behind them. Inside, the shelves were crowded with tins, bolts of cloth, and sacks of flour stacked waist-high. A tall man with a graying beard looked up from behind the counter, his sleeves rolled to his elbows and a ledger open in front of him. "Ellard," he said, nodding. "Been a while." Hollis tipped his hat. "Need salt, nails, and lamp oil." The man glanced at Rowena. "Don't think we've met." She held out her hand. "Rowena Price. Emmett Granger. I run the place. You new around here?" "New enough," she said evenly. Granger's eyes lingered on her for a breath too long, but he nodded and turned to gather Hollis's order. Rowena moved toward the mail shelf at the back. A wooden cubby labeled Riverton held one folded envelope. She slid it free, the paper creased and stained faintly at the edges. Unsealed. She opened it slowly. The handwriting was tight and slanted, her uncle's name signed at the bottom. The farm had been sold last fall. He'd moved south, remarried, and had no plans to return. There was no address left for her. She folded the letter once, then again, and placed it in her coat pocket. When she turned, Hollis was watching her. She didn't speak, just shook her head. He nodded once. "Ready?" She stepped beside him, and they left without another word. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, not heavy, but enough to dust the wagon bed as they rode. The silence between them didn't press. It rested like a coat that fit well. Halfway home, he reached across and took her hand. She laced her fingers with his. That night, she sat at the table sorting dried beans while Hollis sanded down the handle of a spade. The warmth from the stove was thick in the room, and the wind had quieted outside. "You ever think of putting a pen where the old chicken shed used to be?" she asked. "I'd need to clear the bramble first. I could help." He set the spade aside and looked at her. "You're not waiting for something else to come along," she met his gaze. "No, I'm done waiting." He stood slowly, walked over, and crouched beside her chair. "Then I don't want to waste time pretending we're not already building something." Her hand stilled on the beans. "I've got enough lumber for a second bed," he said. "But I don't want one." Rowena's breath caught, but she didn't pull back. "You're sure?" "I've been sure since the day you offered me half a bowl of stew that wasn't yours to give." She laid her palm against his cheek. "I want to make a life here, with you, if you'll have me." "I already do." They stood together in the firelight. There was no rush in the kiss that followed, just the certainty of two people who had found their place, not by luck, but by choosing it. 3 days later, they stood out by the edge of the pasture, just the two of them. There was no preacher, no rings, no words spoken to anyone but each other. Hollis held her hands and said, "This is it, you and me." And Rowena said, "Yes," and that was enough. By late spring, she'd planted the garden behind the house. Rows of beans, squash, and cabbage grew in the soil she turned with her own hands. Holly's built the coop from salvaged wood, and together they filled it with pullets come from a farmer east of the ridge. They traded sowing for seed, eggs for flour, and labor for lumber. Holly's fixed the roof of a neighbor's smokehouse, and Rowena hemmed a wedding dress for a girl she'd never met before. The land gave back what they put in, little by little. And in the evenings, they sat on the porch, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, watching the sky turn from gold to violet. That summer, she stitched a baby blanket, though she never said why. Holly's watched her do it and didn't ask. He just built a cradle when the leaves began to turn. They never spoke of the past, not in the way that reopened wounds. What had shaped them was never denied, but it didn't define them. They had lived through loss, through cold and silence and the long uncertainty between. Now they lived through warmth, through shared labor, quiet laughter, and the steadiness of knowing neither would face another winter alone. When snow fell again, it found their house warm, their roof strong, and their hands joined beneath the quilt Rowena had sewn from scraps their first autumn together. They didn't need to say they loved each other. They showed it every day in the way they worked beside one another, in the way they listened, and in the way they stayed. And they stayed. Always.